All right, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trauma, the Invisible Epidemic from Discovery Behavioral Health and Discovery Mood and Anxiety Program. My name is Peter Fowler. I am the Director of Education for Discovery Mood and Anxiety Program, and I'll be moderating today's event. As many of you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and our goal is to encourage and facilitate open conversations about mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, and trauma. When we can speak openly about mental health, we can learn what signs to look for and when to take action if you or a loved one needs support or treatment. We have a lot of people on the call today, so if you would like to ask questions, and we definitely encourage you to do that, we would just ask that you please use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature, if you'd like to submit a question. Before we begin, though, I'd like for you to think about three different people. I'd like for you to think of a veteran returning home from war, a parent caring for a child with terminal illness, or a student who has been bullied regularly at school. These three people may seem like worlds apart, but they all have something in common. They have all been in situations that can result in trauma. I also think that these are individuals and scenarios that we think of when we think of trauma. And I think it's also very important for us to open up our perspective to understand that trauma comes in all shapes and sizes so that we can be aware of it for ourselves, our loved ones, and those we work with. There are many topics that we could have covered during Mental Health Awareness Month, but the reason we chose trauma, it has a lot to do with what's going on in the world today and has been going on for the last few years. Sadly, this cannot be any more real for us as we yet again are mourning another horrible school shooting that occurred in Texas this week. Far too many students, faculty, and teachers and parents each year deal with trauma from one of these events, and our hearts go out to the Uvalde community and all those affected by another senseless tragedy. In addition to this, 1 year ago, the World Health Organization made a statement that should get everyone's attention. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused mass trauma on a larger scale than World War II, with an impact that will last for years to come. In some respects, it seems like we are back to life as usual, but we must be aware that the effects, both short-term and long-term, that have happened to us, our children, our families, are going to be experienced for many years. And if you are someone who is already struggling with mental health or struggling with addiction before the pandemic, the additional burden of COVID may have challenged you in ways you never anticipated or felt prepared for. So today, we will talk to our panel of experts and learn the most common types of trauma, how we can often be unaware of our trauma and how it impacts us, the importance of understanding our trauma in a transitional phase like COVID-19, as well as coping strategies for people of all ages. Well, as you all can see, we are so blessed today to have a diverse group of panelists who are going to help us see trauma from a variety of different angles. First, I'd like to introduce Maya Evergenis Johnson. She is the author of Neon Jane, a book that just launched this month. Neon Jane is an autobiographical account of her surviving her cancer diagnosis in childhood and the impact it had on her and her family. She is a writer from Sacramento, California, currently residing in Orange County, California. Her writing has been published in The Necessary Fiction, the Black Fork Review, Arcana Literary Journal, the Sacramento News and Review, and the Sacramento Bee. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Maya. Next, we have Elizabeth Ayiku. She is the director of Me Little Me, which made its world premiere at the 2022 South by Southwest Film Festival. Me Little Me is about a young Black woman who is fiercely pursuing a promotion at work while attending an intensive outpatient treatment program for eating disorder recovery. Elizabeth is a Black Canadian-born filmmaker and editor currently residing in Los Angeles, California. Elizabeth's goal is to make character-driven films that will spark important conversations. Me Little Me is her first feature film. Elizabeth, it's great to have you here with us today. Next, I have Dr. Jan Wagman. She is a mental health industry veteran of 23 years, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and has a teaching credential in psychology and government. In addition to working in public schools, crises offices, and private practice, Dr. Wagman has been a first responder to natural disasters, and some of her most memorable experiences have been as a first responder to natural disasters, as well as working with Los Angeles gangs. She is currently a primary care coordinator at Casa Palmera Treatment Center in Del Mar, California. Dr. Wagman, you've worked in situations where trauma has been at the forefront. We really look forward to hearing more from you today. Thank you so much for being here today. Alex Santana is our last panelist. He is a therapist with national recognition of the Peter Washington Honor Medal for years of specialization working with military and veteran populations in both clinical and non-clinical settings. Alex is a clinical social worker at Casa Palmera Treatment Center with extensive experience working with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and substance use disorder. As a United States Marine Corps veteran with combat exposure, Alex uses personal experiences to form bonds used for healing the wounds of trauma. Currently, he serves as a primary care coordinator at Casa Palmera Treatment Center in California. Alex, thank you so much for being here today. So many people associate trauma with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And most commonly, I think that is, most people think of soldiers who are returning from war, but many people don't realize that trauma can exist in a lot of other scenarios. So first, I'd like to ask Dr. Wagman, can you give us a working definition of trauma, and what are some of the common types of trauma that you've seen in your practice?
I've seen a lot, and I think of trauma in terms of a definition of being exposed to something that is out of the ordinary, and it overwhelms your whole systemic system. It's too much. What happens is it's too much, and your body and neurologically is affected and can shut down, and it sometimes can't process what's happened. So I have seen people from here at Casa Palmera, people from 9/11 years later who had counseling right after the tragedy, but you can see like 15 years later, it comes up again. We've had people here, and I've worked with some from 9/11, worked with a woman from Columbine who actually was in med school, and her life was functioning really well. Stuff came up, and poor coping mechanisms. A woman, this is more complex trauma, and for everybody that may not know about it, it's a series of or recurring events that have traumatized one. And you may not feel like you've been traumatized or it's been trauma. And then maybe the next one, no, the next one, no, and then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed, your neurological system, your ability to cope with stress, kind of just, you implode. And we've had a lady here that stayed, I think the longest of all of our patients, because she had 6 from Vietnam on to school shootings, and we're covering what, I don't know, 30 years or something, a long time. So I've seen it from the McMartin School trial, where all the little preschool kids were allegedly sexually assaulted, to probably the 9/11, in between the gang stuff, and losses of people's family members. So there's a lot of kinds of definitions of trauma, but it's essentially your physiological, and I would say your neurological system is just overwhelmed, and you don't cope, or you find ways later in life to cope.
Yeah, I think there's something you said that really stuck out to me, is because a lot of times we think of a traumatic event and that you will see it immediately right after that. And that's not always the case. Somebody could be fully functioning, and then years later, something happens that can trigger that, and it can come back up. And so I think that's an important distinction, because sometimes somebody could go through an event and think that, oh, I've already, that's happened, that's in the past, and not realize the effects that it will have on them years down the road. Alex, also as a clinician, can you provide us any other examples of trauma that you've seen, or what symptoms are associated with trauma? I think it's helpful to kind of understand, like, what's some of the symptoms that people can be looking for to understand for themselves, or maybe a loved one or somebody that they work with.
Absolutely. Dr. Peter Levine said, one of the famous quotes that I bring into a lot of clients and a lot of groups in talking about trauma is that, quote, "Trauma is perhaps the most avoided, ignored, belittled, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering." And that human suffering, I think, is really the roadmap leading into the development of other mental health disorders. Again, the symptoms manifest in many different ways. There's the traditional things that we look for with, the withdrawal symptoms, anger, substance use, but there's also other things that are a lot of times celebrated in society. Things like, avoidance to, again, getting back to the quote, that suffering. So we engage in activities like extreme dieting, addictions to physical fitness, which can be symptomatic of the underlying issue, that suffering that maybe we were trying to avoid feeling or dealing with. And we are exacerbating symptoms in other ways because those symptoms are going to manifest.
Yeah, I like that you brought up how sometimes those things can get celebrated or not, that there's no recognition and that this is actually coming from some traumatic event. And I think that that's one of the things where, again, one of the reasons we're doing this is to bring up awareness so that people can ask questions. Why do I respond this way? Or when they're struggling and they need support and treatment, recognizing that this is something that I need to understand and learn how to handle or manage or to seek support for. Now, I'd love to come to Maya. First, congratulations on your new book, Neon Jane. In this book, you discuss your journey with a medical diagnosis you received as a child. Can you tell us a little bit about that diagnosis and how it impacted you as a child, as well as also as an adult as it pertains to trauma?
Of course. Thanks, Peter. I'm really excited about the book and how it kind of shows how that diagnosis just influences my whole life. So I think after I was diagnosed and when I, recovered and was feeling a lot better, around, and that's a really common theme amongst like cancer survivors. You hear that, like, I won't let my medical diagnosis define me. I think now I realize huge part of who I am. And I think embracing that instead of trying to run away from that has made me such a happier and just like healthier person, just seeing how it does impact my life. When you're told at 13 that your blood basically malfunctioned and your cells are eating each other, that's going to impact you for the rest of your life. So I think instead of shutting that off and like leaning a little bit more into it and seeing, oh, how does this impact my relationships? How did this impact my family? I think it really helped me to move forward and not like think I had to shut it down, but kind of learn how to live with that.
Yeah, it sounds like you learned to embrace that and accept that event as well as that diagnosis is part of who you are. And can I ask, what would be maybe the factor that helped you the most with acknowledging that and being more aware of that piece of yourself?
I think it cut out.
Yeah, we lost you for a second, Maya. Oh, did I lose her altogether? It looks like I did. I think Maya will join us in just a little bit. So we'll get back to that question. Well, then I would love to come to our next panelist, Elizabeth. This year, your film, Me Little Me, was featured at South by Southwest Film Festival. Congratulations. That's a huge milestone. Congratulations. That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the role that trauma played in the main characters and some of the takeaways from as a viewer?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, and the main character, trauma, basically, it was important to me to showcase that she was trying to deal with trauma she experienced as a child, but was also experiencing daily new traumas by being a Black woman just living in America. So, and even as I say that, I'm like, it always makes me very nervous, especially on a panel with a bunch of people that don't look like me. I feel like I have to explain more, like, because this, and this, but I don't know. I think that's why I decided to show rather than tell what this main character was going through while trying to also recover, because it's never just one thing, being a Black femme woman in America, because we're also dealing with that. The daily microaggressions, I think the definition, I loved the definition the doc from Casa Palmera said that trauma it was a response to something that's out of the ordinary, I think she said, which I loved so much, because we can tell that something's not right and something is out of the ordinary by the way, we have to function, and it's traumatic, every day. It's something we also have to deal with. So I didn't want to, oh my, it's not. So I didn't want to, beat people over the head with it, because no one likes to be preached to, but it was important to me to include it in the film. So.
Well, it sounds like you have a very, important voice to have and to tell, and making sure that I think everybody's voice is heard. Because again, I think even when we were opening up this discussion, a lot of times we can think of PTSD or trauma as being very stereotypical, and it's not. And so I think one of the best ways that we can do that is use various mediums to express that and show that. And so your movie touched a lot on some issues that people don't feel really comfortable discussing. How do you keep conversations like that going to help those who are struggling with that, especially those people who are struggling with trauma? How do you help that conversation continue to go, and making sure that, again, everybody's voice is heard?
I mean, I think my way has been through art, through film, through getting it on the screen, because I don't know if I would have been able to do it otherwise, just sit down and have conversations with people. Because again, no one, I don't know anyone, I think, who just likes to be preached at, because, already you feel like you're being, I guess I'm speaking from my experience, you're being talked to like a child, and no one wants to, be like, okay, so everything is wrong. This is how it really is. So I think film has been a really good medium for me. I know other artists use painting and writing, like Maya, and I just, I think through the arts, music, through whatever, you can get your hands on, is just such a good way to just to express yourself and keep these conversations going, and to get people interested in something they didn't know they would have interest in otherwise.
Yeah, and from what you've talked about with this film, it also sounds like somebody could see themselves in that character who may not typically. And I think that's one of the most important things going on right now is I do believe that mental health, thankfully, is being portrayed more in our television shows and movies. But again, it can be done stereotypically, or it can be done, I don't want to say cliche, but to a certain extent cliche. And it's important to break down some of those boundaries and ensure that everyone is represented, and that personal stories are represented, so that people can find and see that, and maybe become aware that, oh my gosh, I went through something similar and I never realized that I was doing some of the same things, and this is, and that was my struggle as well. I do have to, because I've already seen some questions coming up in the chat. How can people watch your film, Elizabeth? Because I've seen a lot of people say they would love to see it. So how is there a way? And I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people looking for how can I watch this?
It's okay. So right now, film festivals and educational screenings. We're in the early stages, but if folks want to set up an educational screening with me, please reach out to me directly. And yeah, we can set that up. But yeah, that's the stage we're in right now.
Okay, well, that's great, and hopefully, maybe we can put your email in the chat or the Q&A towards the end, and people could reach out to you, because like myself, I would love to see this, and so it sounds I've already seen a lot of people say that they would love to as well. So I would like to kind of start opening things back up to all of our panelists, because again, this is important that multiple voices are heard, as well as recognizing that everyone has a different experience, and I think that is so important with trauma. There's so many people, part of my personal story is I'm a past high school history teacher. And so I've always told people that history informs the way I've done therapy. But one of the things, and one of my favorite timepieces to study has been World War II. I've watched lots of movies, television shows, read lots of books. And what is always so unique is how people could have gone through the exact same experience, and it affects everybody differently. And I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of trauma, is that, people can go through the same event and have very, very different experiences, both in positive, but also obviously in ways that are very hurtful or harmful. So I'd like to ask this group, is it possible to experience trauma and not realize it? And if so, can any of you talk about examples of that, what that looks like, maybe personally, but also, or maybe through your work and what you've come across? how might that manifest itself, or how might people not realize it, or what might help them become more aware of the trauma that they've experienced in their life?
Okay.
Go.
Okay, Dr. Jan, over here. I worked with a kid, let's say here, who was a skateboarder, and skateboarders, you know, have no fear of death, and wild and crazy. He was on, I think it was a neighborhood street with his friends, and he decided to do, I don't know, a rail or something off of the curb, and a big, it wasn't a dump truck, but like a cement truck, backed over him, didn't see him. And his friends were there, you know, right there with him, but they didn't get hit, knocked down, or injured as he did. So they were standing there watching helplessly as he was slowly dying. He did not die, but his friends, each one of them, handled what they had seen and gone through in a different way. Because it was a public trial. They were all witnesses and called to stand. And each story was amazing, reflected how each, you know, their whole systemic body, everything going on inside was different. And the kid that got helped, he sadly, he became not aware, lost memory of what happened. So you had with a TBI. So he was barely functioning, but a beautiful kid, young, handsome adolescent. His friends, all in the recording of the trial, recalled it differently. So there's something called resiliency, you know, and is it built in? Do you acquire it? But because one kid survives it, was able to return to school and was okay. 2 others, you know, one became an addict. It plays out in terms of, I think, nature nurture. So for me, that I learned a lot from that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go ahead and add something. You know, this comes up a lot in the form of clients that I work with, typically with siblings who grew up in the same household, where maybe there was prolonged abuse and things like that going on. A question that clients will ask a lot is, why doesn't my sibling remember the trauma like I do, or why aren't they affected like I am? So a lot of times, especially early developmental trauma, when we can't psychologically process the experience that's going on, the defense mechanism of dissociation will kick in, to where unconsciously we're still processing what's going on, but consciously we repress automatically that experience, because it can be so overwhelming that it could lead to a psychological collapse for that individual. But again, that body is still going to hold the score of that trauma. So again, it's important to acknowledge that trauma does not just live in our minds, it lives in our entire body, our entire system, as Dr. Jan Wagman talked about earlier. So that's an important distinction to make in terms of folks who may not be aware of trauma that they've experienced, is because there's that unconscious automatic repression that comes up for them.
Since we're talking about that awareness, you know, what would be your suggestions if somebody starts recognizing, outside of, you know, the therapist office, but starts to recognize, why am I responding this way, or they're having some struggles? What would be your feedback or advice to somebody who is starting to recognize that an event that happened to them in the past is starting to have impacts on other areas of their life?
I don't want to hog the thing. So if no one talks, I will.
Go for it.
Okay. When you start to have a problem, say with your relationships, you can't sustain them and you're wondering what's going on. You have a lot of chronic illnesses and go, why me? When you get to that place, I think when you're stuck in your life and you go, what is it? Why am I always shunned at work? And then you go home and drink. It's I think the repetitive behaviors that are psychologically killing you. At some point, you hit the wall. And at some point you go, something's going on. I've got to get help. And it's usually therapy. And the therapy can be in a variety of ways, but it's usually whether it's religious, spiritual, or an official, like a licensed therapist. I think people seek out help again when they're just like at the bottom, just like with using. I can't go on anymore. My life is totally unmanageable. So other people might reflect that back to you, observe it, and very helpfully tell you that they have an idea, some suggestions. You might not be open to it, but I think getting help professionally probably is where most people who are stuck start, either with at work, the HR department, and they're going to help counsel you. So it's reaching out for help. And I see people do it in a variety of ways.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any suggestions, or just, again, it could be from you, like your personal experience of what helped you kind of want to reach out, or, it made me even think of with Elizabeth's film or Maya's book, what encouraged you to share this? I know, Elizabeth, you had talked a little bit about not wanting to beat people over the head, but I think it takes a lot of courage to share a story and to bring this up and to sit in these types of conversations. And so what encouraged you to tell that story, Elizabeth? Maya, what encouraged you to write this autobiographical? I'd love to hear from you as well, because I think you bring a lot to the table.
I can go for it if that's okay with Maya.
Yeah, go for it, Elizabeth.
Okay. It was something that needed to come out. It was therapeutic for me, and I didn't realize how much so until I think even probably like in the cutting room floor, like as I was editing it, I was just feeling so much. I knew I needed to get it out. I didn't completely understand why, but it was just like I needed to. I was like, okay, this has to get out of my head, get on paper, then on screen. And I think during production, like while we were shooting, I definitely dissociated. It was wild. Like thinking back, it's literally like I was watching someone else edit the film, and give the directions and be on set. Because that's just the role I stepped into, and was like, okay, so shut off that this was your life, and now you're just directing people to portray this character and this character. And yeah, when I started editing, it was a lot. It was just like, oh no, why did I make this? Like, what was I thinking? This is too much. Like, oh, this is torture, So it's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I knew that I would feel all the things I would feel. I don't know if I would have done it, but I just it was what I felt I needed to do at the time. And I don't know. And I didn't care what I was at the point in my life where I was just like, damn what anyone else has to say about it, because I've had to suppress and lie, I think, about what I've experienced so much in my life, that I was just like, oh, well, if people don't like what I gotta say, it's not gonna make a difference to me at this point in my life. So I think that's kind of just, yeah, that's where making the film came from. And I don't know how else to explain it. Sorry.
I'd love to, before I get to I'd love to just ask a quick follow-up. You said it was therapeutic. And so what do you feel like was the realization, or how has this, by telling your story in this way, such a public way, how has this affected you in a positive way? Because it sounds like it has.
It has. I think just having a voice finally, just literally being able to speak what I knew to be true all these years, but was, I know the term gaslit is like being overused now, but that's just what it was. Like all, I feel like throughout my life, it's like, no, that's not that, or that's not so bad, or other people in other parts of the world have it worse, so this isn't so bad. You had a roof over your head, or and all that nonsense. But no, I was neglected. I was not taken care of. I had other traumas that really, really affected me, and I couldn't go to family about it. I couldn't, I didn't always feel safe with the professionals that I had access to. So this was my way of just being like, okay, I'm just getting it all out, and whatever happens, happens.
It sounds like it was a very validating experience for you.
Oh, yes.
That's really what I'm hearing, is just like validating that this happened to me. Like, you know, it's, whether it's acceptance or ownership, but it's validating to say this happened to me and this is my story and it's important to tell.
It was validating. That's the word I think I've been looking for. And even at South by, that was amazing, being embraced by South by Southwest, because I just told, you know, my story as I knew it, but they were like, Elizabeth, this is so universal. Like, they just kept telling me, like, we all just felt something from it. And I was just, I think my heart stopped a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Thank you for telling me that, because, you know, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known.
Well, we're so glad that you did take that step of faith of just to tell that story. So Maya, similar question, you know, what gave you this desire to share it? You know, how, you know, as I said, I think it takes a lot of bravery to share your life or to share an experience on such a public way. So what helped you get to that place? And also, kind of like I asked Elizabeth, what effects of telling your story and having other people hear your story, see your story, what did you notice came out of that experience for yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, listening to what Elizabeth said, I just relate to so much of that, Elizabeth. Like, I think that we're in creating art from a trauma, you kind of get to process it and find something new in it. And I think for me, I remember when I finished the first draft of Neon Jane, I kind of just looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, these are all the most like awkward moments of my whole life. Why would I want them on this paper for people to read publicly? But I think I slowly started to see that everybody can relate to all of those moments. Like, as the book has been released, there are people who they haven't had any sort of connection to illness or anything, and they're just saying, that's how I have these situations with my family that are exactly like that, or I really feel the same way, just about how life goes on. You know, things happen and we move forward. And so I think writing is really therapeutic, but mostly it's just been a way for me to connect and not feel, I think, so alone. I think oftentimes in trauma, you feel like you're all by yourself. But I think the book and in the response that I'm getting to it, I just get a lot of messages saying, wow, like I really connected to that. And it makes me feel just close to, like, there's a universal closeness that I feel from it. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying, because going back to what Elizabeth had said as well, is just that a lot of times, and it's very true, trauma can make somebody feel very, very alone, very isolated, because again, it can be very unique to them and their experience, or an experience that was just unique. Not everybody has gone through that. And so many people can relate. So many people can connect. And it takes, I think, again, the bravery of individuals to share their experience and what they've gone through that allows, and then I think hopefully, and I'm assuming, you know, a little bit in this, but I'm assuming hopefully you saw somebody maybe trailblaze, and maybe you didn't, maybe you just, again, took that bravery on yourself to go out, but a lot of times it takes the bravery of others to kind of start paving that way of, we need to tell this story. You know, and my story has value, not just for myself, but I believe for other people. I think that's such an important piece when you're working with trauma, because I've seen already a lot in our comments and the chat of just, for a lot of people, the lies that come up. And so I think as I'm thinking through some of our questions and some of the things that have come up through this discussion, we use, I think sometimes in our field, we use things like maladaptive coping skills or unhealthy coping skills. How do those impact trauma? Or, you know, and again, speaking from a personal level for any of you or with the patients that you've worked with, how does living in those lies or using unhealthy coping skills impact individuals and their experience of trauma? I'll come back maybe to our clinicians just maybe to start us off, but I'd love to hear from Maya and Elizabeth as well. Yeah, Dr. Jan and Alex.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. So, you know, how it shows up, you know, again, in the world that we work in here, obviously, trauma is typically rooted at the base of the addiction. So getting to that, the symptoms of the trauma are what are going to manifest, and a lot of times that manifests through self-medication, the pain, that suffering that we talk about that the person is experiencing in this isolated state of being alone and feeling disconnected, unsafe in the world, with their perspective that's shifted, in the belief system that they carry. Again, everybody's looking for relief from that, or some type of escape, some way to numb that out. And this is seen as like the symptom of avoidance that comes through with trauma. And drugs and alcohol are a very powerful and effective, not healthy, but effective mechanism in finding that escape, that release, that relief from that pain that they've been holding and suffering in. So again, maladaptive coping strategies of, drinking and drugging behavior that spiral, start as self-medication. Maybe it's the only way that a person gets a full night of sleep, right? We hear that constantly. And then it spirals into something bigger that, now needs containment before we can even start to address the trauma.
I think that's an important thing to note as well, with that it is our reaction, our response to it is a lot of times we are trying to manage that symptom, that we are trying to do something to take care of it. It's just that we're not doing it in the healthiest way. I think that's, for some people, they don't realize that they actually are asking for help, that they do want to get better because they're doing these things to manage it. It's just not necessarily the healthiest way. And so we need to support them in understanding that and how it's affecting them, as well as then learning how to manage that. Dr. Wagman, would there be anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. Part of my own story is when I was a kid, my dad was he was going to USC, my mom was working. I had two younger sisters. We were kind of raised by our grandparents. And my grandfather was a sexual abuser. And I didn't know what was happening. But as I remembered it as I grew up, and I wondered why some of my symptoms were coming up, at different times in my adulthood, I remember things that were happening. I remember looking around going, why isn't somebody helping me? Mom, Dad, someone be here. Grandma, where is that person supposed to protect me? The person that is supposed to protect a child. It didn't happen. And so I kept a lot of what happened as a secret. And I became an angry kid, an angry teenager. Before I really started learning what therapy, psychology was all about, I did not know how to express that. So I would say going into this field has helped me tremendously. And just one other quick thing. I had a lady that I've worked with who was assaulted by a member of a religion. And it's a very strict religion. But she was sexually assaulted and her husband was way up in the church. And I think, she told someone and they didn't believe her. So her way, talk about maladaptive coping mechanisms, but I've kept in touch with her for years. She became a prostitute secretly, and no one knew it. She came out here for drugs, but no one knew the trauma that was underlying all of this. And in prostitution, she explained it to me, was that the guy had to pay her. She got the money, she was in control. This is my sexual redemption in a sense. This is how I express my anger at men. So she did a lot of work on it. We did a lot of creative artwork on that. And that became her voice. So maladaptive secrets, for me, looking, why wasn't someone there? For her, it was anger, damn, okay, you got it, all right, I got you. So she found a way for payback. But it wasn't helping, obviously. It was living two lives. So, it's scary sometimes.
Yeah, I'm gonna position towards Elizabeth and Maya. For you, how did you recognize that? Because as a therapist, I always tell patients that I work with and families that I work with that I don't like the word normal, because I've worked with teenagers for so many years, and everyone just says, I want to be a normal teenager. And I tell them, please tell me what that is, because I've met with hundreds, thousands of kids, and I don't know what a normal teenager looks like. They come, again, everybody looks different. And so what, for you, when did you recognize this isn't normal, or this is, again, that this is more than, what somebody else might be going through, and that, or recognizing that, wow, this event or these series of events has been impacting me? What was there a catalyst? Was it a one-time epiphany like light bulb, or was it this progression and this evolution of experiences and realizations that came up for you? Because I do again believe that that's unique for each person. Elizabeth, Maya, what would you say for yourselves?
I'll speak first if that works, Elizabeth.
Absolutely.
I think for me, it was when I was in college, I was studying in New York, and I had some of my college best friends who still had no clue that I had gone through acute myeloid leukemia treatment when I was 13. I think I remember, being like in my junior year and just kind of thinking like, this is really odd that I don't feel comfortable sharing this side of myself. Like, I'm embarrassed by it, I'm ashamed by it, and I feel really lonely sharing that. And I remember having situations where I would have some of my like college friends and my high school friends maybe at an event or something, like someone would visit, and being concerned that one of my high school friends might share that they knew that about me, that had happened to me in middle school. And I think that in college, that was a real sign for me, like, wow, I might be functioning and going to class and being a fully functioning human being, but like there's clearly a lot of issues that I've got going on, and like some shame about having such a sick body. So I think that was a sign for me that, maybe like the lying of being like, I'm fine needed to stop, and I needed to focus on it. And then I think that's when this writing kind of took over and the book kind of came pouring out.
Thank you. Elizabeth, what about you?
I think once I realized that the feelings weren't going away, it wasn't just like, I was like, oh, it's not just a thing that I'm going to forget, or that's when I knew it was a problem, even though, it's not talked about in our communities and in our society. Everything I was going through, I was just like, well, I don't care if it's not talked about. It's not, this way I'm feeling, it's not normal, whatever normal is, like you were saying. It's out of the ordinary, and it's disruptive, and it's making me a liar, so I don't want to be a professional liar. And I just I think those are the things. That's when I started being like, no, this person who said that is wrong, because this is what I'm feeling. So it wasn't just a sudden, I think, moment. It was maybe in some ways it was, but it was accumulating, over the years. The realization.
So you just said something, and we had been asked this question as well, and so I wanted to pose this again to the group. Is it realistic to expect the trauma will go away completely, or that trauma is something that they just will have to manage on a long-term basis or for their lifetime? As a group, what do you all feel that is trauma something that, oh my goodness, I'm going to have PTSD for the rest of my life? Again, from a personal experience, but or maybe individuals that you've worked with.
I mean, since my mic's still on, I'll just go really.
Go for it, Elizabeth. Yeah.
I think it'll look differently, right? I don't think it'll just go away like magic, as much as we'd like it to. It's and like Maya was saying earlier, it's her traumatic event has made her who she is. So it can't really. I don't see how it could ever really just go away, but 100% look different, whether it's whether it's a series of events, or just like one traumatic event. I think throughout your life, the trauma will look different, and that just depends on how we process it and how we move through life with it.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of add on something to that. Like, I think that for me, it's always going to be a part of my life. But I think I've just learned how to manage it and not become so, I guess, like upset when something comes up for me. Like, I remember a time where I walked into a gym for a sports game, and something about the smell, there was a smell that I smelled that smelled like chemotherapy. And I remember just kind of like running to the bathroom and just kind of being like, I need to just have a second to myself, and like kind of like losing it a little. And I think that now, where I am in my life, where if there's something comes up for me like that, I feel like I can just mentally say, you know, oh yeah, like that happened to me and that's still a huge part of my life and I'm okay. So I think I've just learned how to, like, with my mental health, I'm just so much more stable with what I went through. And I know it's a part of me, but it doesn't have to like take over my day, if that makes sense.
Mhm. I think that, that's a big piece and distinction of it is, there's awareness and ownership of those things, and an awareness of that it has made us who we are. And that's why, as I said, I brought up being a high school history teacher, because I always say, like, you can't change the past, but you can learn about it, and that will help you move forward. And so being able to recognize how those things, and again, even go back to what Elizabeth had said before, of like how that validates us, and there's more recognition of that has made me who I am, and then that's also now how I'm going to address this as I move forward. Alex or Dr. Wagman, anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah. In terms of, can you be fixed or will it ever go away? I use the words when I work with, say, in a trauma group, I will say you can be healed. It's a healing process.
Mm-hmm.
And in most traumas, especially if it develops into PTSD, there's a sense of your life has been fragmented or fractured. So your environment, you do things all in separate pieces, and it's not really making sense. Inside, you wonder why you feel this, why you're triggered. You don't know what triggering is. You can't sleep, you can't go to school, you can't work, you can't eat. Different things go into compartments. So you're not integrated. And with the work that I do, using some trauma-informed care, it's all integrated. It's all towards the goal of bringing the person and their environment, everything, to becoming whole again. The memories will never go away, but I think there's a healing process that takes place. Like I said, it helps you become who you are based on what you do with it. But I do think, and I think trauma-informed care also believes that as you heal and you become more whole, you return to life, and you can really function and be productive and follow passionate careers, whatever it is, once you're a whole person.
I'll add on, I think one of the clear distinctions in destigmatizing mental health with specific trauma is that the trauma, once we get to this level of understanding of our own experiences, the trauma, those experiences don't define us. Yes, they are a part of us. We can't go back in time and change what happened, but the impact, the response that happens within us, that's what we can reclaim some ownership and empower ourselves with. Just a personal example, right? As we're talking about current events of the recent, past, Tuesday, I had to walk away from news coverage because I felt my trauma as a war veteran starting to come up. The agitation in my body, the shallowness in my breath. So it's something that comes up. I tell clients and groups all the time, stupid people are not going away. You are going to be triggered. But again, recognition of that, deepening your level of understanding of identifying those triggers. So you can intervene as early as possible and figure out, what do I need in this moment? Maybe I need to step away from this TV. I need to take some space. I need some air. I need to move this energy that's in my body that's causing a reaction. So no, it's never going to go away, but we can heal from it.
Yeah, living with rather than trying to avoid. I think that's so important, because I think that's, Dr. Wagman, you said something that really stuck out to me, because as a clinician, especially working with teenagers, how can I be fixed? Or honestly, a parent bringing their child to me saying, how can you fix my child? And I having to explain that is not how therapy works. And with that, I wanted to ask, and I'm going to come back to both of you, especially as clinicians. At Discovery Mood and Anxiety, we use evidence-based therapies. And so and I'm sure that you do at Casa Palmera as well. So what therapies do you feel or you have experienced as being the most effective in dealing with trauma, and how do they work? Because I've gotten quite a few questions about, how do we give a voice? How do we support people in understanding and working through their trauma. So what evidence-based therapies do you use in your practice with trauma specifically? Yeah, go for it, Dr. Wagman.
I don't know how we signal. Mine can be evidence-based, if you're gonna talk about somatic therapy and all of the mindfulness and relaxation therapies. I incorporate that, but I don't say I do one kind of therapy for trauma. And if I had to describe it, it would be a language kind of therapy where I am really not just listening to whoever I'm sitting with, walking with. I'm hearing them, and I think that's what they want, is to be heard as to their story. And as you hear it, you can learn what their words are meaning, what their tones are meaning, what their body language is meaning. And I stay right with that. So we can speak in a common language. And I will never put something on them that I think, oh, you seem like right now that that maybe something went on with you when you were little. I just stay right in that moment. And like Elizabeth, I believe the creative arts, the healing arts, movement, climbing trees. I had one client that we did it as a trauma survivor who wanted me to watch her climb this tree down by the beach. We walked, and she wanted me to take notes on it so I could give her feedback and in essence reaffirm that she was free. So I do a lot of that if that's where the client, patient, whatever is, but I only know where they is if I really listen and hear them. So then I move with them. Not on top, not here.
Well, that's such a big piece of therapy, is meeting patients where they are at. And so I definitely have never heard of, watching somebody climb a tree as a way. And so clearly, I think one of the unique pieces of this is there's a lot of variety of ways. And it comes back to a common theme that I've heard throughout everybody's comments is giving somebody the opportunity to have their voice heard,
Yes.
And that looks different, there's a lot of mediums that do that, but a big piece of trauma therapy is giving a voice. What about you, Alex, in your work with patients, both whether they're veterans or, at Casa Palmera, what do you find is the modality that you work out of, or again, using evidence-based therapies that you feel are appropriate and successful when working with individuals with trauma?
Yeah, I mean, aside from, the usuals, the narrative therapies, the processing therapies, I found a lot of efficacy in regaining control and presence in the moment with mindfulness strategies, breath work, and meditation. This is something that, I feel like with a healthy mixture of these with processing therapies, give the client a sense of containment within their own self, within their own skin, to be able to feel safe enough to process and to go to these places where they are uncovering some very uncomfortable experiences and memories and feelings within their body that can be overstimulating and dysregulating. So developing a healthy set of coping mechanisms to maintain that level of safety for the client. That's what I found the most effective.
Thank you. I did want to just remind everyone, and we have a few more minutes, please, we have a Q&A. We'd love to have some questions, so I want to come back to that. And I'm not sure if anyone will be able to, but this question definitely stuck out to me, and I'd love to see if anyone has some thoughts. And it said, I've been seeing how somatic therapy techniques and CBT aren't as effective for people of color as they are for white people due to the daily impact of structural oppression, and that these are asking people to be in their bodies, and these are bodies that are daily oppressed. Is that something that you all can speak to? So I think it's important to recognize, again, that trauma affects everyone differently, but also the ways that we treat people, and again, what might be evidence-based may be very specific to populations. So would anybody like to speak to that and respond?
Ooh, yes, please. Can I? Thank you. Who said that? I love them, by the way. I can't see the chat's down there.
Yeah, it's anonymous. Yeah.
Okay. Whew, yes. So early on in my treatment, I thought I was doing it wrong because it wasn't like, okay, so I don't know if anyone's mentioned DBT, but some parts of it really did help me a lot. But I don't know, lately, especially, I've tried to go back to some of those things I learned in treatment and they're not working. And it's reminding me of like the early days. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm just not doing it right. I got to do better. No, I can't feel all the feelings and all the things the same as like see, now I'm gonna take a sip of water here. Last week when we just lost 10 members, elders of our community. Whew, I'm still processing. It's like if I really felt that and processed exactly why it happened, how they were feeling, all that, all my feelings surrounding that, I think I might just die, that's how strongly that's how much I couldn't do the, take another sip of water here. Yeah, that's how strongly that's how much I was not able to do the things that were recommended to me while in treatment because, and I wrote like an angry email. I have a confidant, my dietitian, who's just been so helpful in times like this because I was just like, it's offensive to me to say, just feel the feelings and this and that, when there's so much violence and so much, sorry, not making sense. I should have thought about what I was saying first before I raised my hand.
It makes complete sense.
Thank you for saying that, Maya. Yeah, we're not able to in order to survive. A lot of times our coping mechanisms are shutting down, and because we have to work, we have to keep going, we can't just lay down and or do an activity when the systems of oppression aren't going away, when things like this keep happening in our community and we keep witnessing it. So I'm really grateful to that person for bringing that up because that's one issue that I had in treatment was there was just a blanket treatment for all of us. It was I won't mention where this happened, but it was a very all lives matter environment. When I'd bring up socioeconomic status, race, things like that, it was just like, well, let me challenge you on that, because they look to challenge treatment. So, but it was very it was very uninformed and it was harmful. So yes, not all these treatments work for people of color, especially for Black people living in America. It's different, it's just different, and that needs to be recognized. So thank you.
Recognized and hopefully more addressed, I think, is one of the things that I'm hearing with that question, as well as I appreciate, Elizabeth, your vulnerability with answering that question and your passion, because we do need to recognize that one size does not fit all, and that we also need to do more research because again, going back to that idea of evidence-based therapies, we want to make sure that this is evidenced for all, or that we continue to do research to ensure that all populations are able to get treated in a way that works for them, and to recognize all the variables that go into and what people have to deal with, because it is very unique to populations. It can be very unique to people. And so, even going back to what Dr. Wagman had said, is just why, whether it's an eclectic approach or just recognizing that one size does not fit all, or one therapy may not work with all individuals, and how that can actually sometimes, unfortunately, turn people away from therapy. And I think that that's important. So thank you again, Elizabeth, for your vulnerability and willingness to jump into that question. We are actually at the top of the hour, and we we had discussed this a little bit before. We would love to continue to have you, if you want to ask some more questions. One idea was that we would pose those to the panelists and that we could email you out some of those questions, where, possibly with, the amount of people that jumped in and some of the questions that we got asked, we're even looking at potentially doing a whole nother webinar, because this is it's such an important topic to talk about, and not just in the month of May when it's mental health awareness. That's one of the concerns, is that we could, only do this once a year, or that these kind of conversations are only happening every blue moon, and we can't allow that to happen, because unfortunately trauma is happening every single day to people across this country and throughout the world. And we didn't even, touch base on the trauma that's going on overseas right now with the war. There are just so many different forms of trauma that are out there, and there's a lot of ways, again, that I'm hoping people took some hope away from this, that there's a lot of ways that it can be treated. And I think the most important thing is for people to find their voice and to recognize that there are people who want to hear that and will, learn from it, and that there's a lot of avenues that their voice can. So I am just so thankful and honored and humbled to be a part of this webinar, and to have these amazing panelists share authentically and honestly from their experiences and from their education. And so, as I said, please continue to ask questions if you have. We would love to answer those. But we are so thankful for you joining us today, and we just hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.